Alisa Finsten, the Chief of Staff here at the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles, and it's a pleasure to welcoming you to this conversation. We all know that anti-Semitism is a major issue facing our community, and we are joined today by an esteemed group of panelists and a moderator who you will meet shortly to share their perspectives on what's going on in our world and how we are all grappling with it and what we can do. We wanted to bring this conversation together to you today to learn and discuss. This is what we do at the Federation: identify the greatest challenges and create opportunities to meet those challenges. Normally, I would start a program like this by talking about our programs and our initiatives, but today I just want to give you an in-depth introduction to our moderator, Maia Ferdman, because Maia's path exemplifies the power of the Federation and the work that we do. I first met Maia in September 2016 in Jerusalem, when I was there leading a mission of community leaders as part of our Community Engagement Strategic Initiative. Maia was in Israel as part of her Fischel Fellowship, a Federation fellowship created to give young adults a sense of Jewish understanding and responsibility through a multifaceted and immersive experience. She was awarded this fellowship after she graduated from UCLA. While she was part of this fellowship, she served with the Joint Distribution Committee, the JDC, in India and in Sofia, Bulgaria. She was at the Federation's Israel office in Jerusalem, and then in our Federation's office here in Los Angeles, where she worked with our young adult programs and community engagement team and focused on community service and creating programs celebrating global Jewry. Maia then participated in our inaugural cohort of facilitators that Federation recruited and trained through our partnership with Resetting the Table, where we trained individuals in Los Angeles to learn how to facilitate conversations across differences. We have gone on to host many conversations with Los Angeles Jewish organizations that Maia has been part of facilitating. Finally, Maia was a member of the class of 2020 of our Rautenberg New Leaders Project, our civic engagement leadership program, where we engage Jewish young adults who are emerging civic leaders and learn together on the most pressing issues facing Los Angeles and our region. She was part of the cohort that started together in person and had to quickly pivot to be online because of COVID. And since then, she has founded Bridges International Intergroup Relations Consulting and is the assistant director at the Luskin Center for History and Policy at UCLA. It is my absolute pleasure to turn it over to Maia, our moderator, who will also introduce our speakers.
Thank you so much, Alisa. Wow, what an introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much to the Jewish Federation for having me, and of course, for all of the different programs and opportunities that I've been able to participate in over the last few years. So I want to zoom out for a moment and just give context for this conversation. Like anybody watching this webinar, I watched the events at Colleyville, Texas with a mixture of shock, dismay, and a sense of being honestly at a loss. Hate crimes have risen dramatically across the country and in Los Angeles, and religiously motivated hate crimes in particular that are reported largely target the Jewish community. Now, I'm a believer in grappling with the tensions and complexities of events like this and grasping for ways to move forward. And so I'm really looking forward to doing that with a stellar panel of people that can do just that. So you can go into the event description to get a much more in-depth bio of each of our panelists. But I want to introduce first Rabbi Noah Farkas, who has served as the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles since just last month, January of 2022. Prior to this role, he served as a clergy member of Valley Beth Shalom, the largest Jewish congregation in the San Fernando Valley. And Rabbi Farkas is really a true civic leader in Southern California and has dedicated a significant amount of time to fighting and advocating for the most vulnerable in our community. Welcome, Rabbi Farkas.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Thank you. Next, we have Rabbi Susan Goldberg, who is the founder of Nefesh, an open-hearted spiritual community capturing the energy and vitality of LA's East Side. Rabbi Goldberg has led the renewal of the historic Wilshire Boulevard Temple in Koreatown before founding Nefesh, And she's also a consultant and teacher who's committed to cross-cultural dialogue and social justice. Welcome, Rabbi Susan Goldberg.
Hi, it's good to be here. Hello, everyone.
And last but not least, we have Elisha Wiesel, a former Wall Street executive who also works to uplift the voices of the most vulnerable and stand up for persecuted communities here and around the world. Along with Rabbi Farkas, Elisha serves on the board of Zioness, and we also know him as the son of the luminary Elie Wiesel. Welcome, Elisha. Wonderful. So just to say a word about what to expect with the arc of this conversation, it's really going to reflect the long title of this program. We're going to start by looking at by really situating the current state of anti-Semitism in a historical context, understanding really what's going on today. We're then going to grapple a little bit with anti-Semitism. What does it mean? What is our responsibility in the face of it? What are some of the nuances and challenges that arise when we face it? And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about where do we go from here? How do we build and how do we move forward in the face of anti-Semitism? And I want to tell all of our audience members that we'll leave some time at the end to take audience questions. So please feel free to submit your questions into the Q&A box as we go along. Beautiful. So let's go ahead and get started with the title of the program today. Elisha, you reminded us of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1349 and its significance as one event in a long history of anti-Semitism, but maybe not everybody necessarily knows what happened. So can you just first start by telling us what is that event? What happened?
Yeah, and I mean, the history books differ on whether it was hundreds or over 1,000 that were, burned to death and killed. But the amazing thing to me about the Strasbourg massacre in 1349, when I think about anti-Semitism today, is you read the story, and by the way, look it up online. It's a pretty crazy story, but it's ultimately a story of class warfare. It's that flavor of anti-Semitism in 1349 that gets us. It's not the standard racial attack. It's not even the standard religious attack. Actually, at that point, the church is trying, they'd been issuing papal bulls to try to prevent the killing of Jews at that point. I don't know if it's because they felt they'd gone too far. I should study that more. But at that moment in time, the church was actually, at that point, say, whoa, slow down, like stop killing them because of the poisoning of the wells. It's actually a crime to keep spreading that. And what really happened in Strasbourg was it was class warfare. The Jews had paid for protection from the city's rulers, and they were ensconced, among the different classes, performing their jobs, performing their services. But ultimately, there was this entire class warfare thing where ultimately there was a revolt against the classes who were further higher on the totem chain, the totem pole, and that, no surprise, ends very badly for the Jews. So what I really found interesting is that so many hundreds of years later, there is still, I think, a desire. Anti-Semitism has become so politicized. The left wing will say, look at all that anti-Semitism over there. You have Charlottesville. You have these racial things going on. You have people saying things like, Jews will not replace us. And they point at that and say, you got to clean that up. Republicans, you got to go clean it up. But then you have real elements of hatred towards Jews in Israel that occur on the left. And of course, that's what the right wing likes to point at, rather than cleaning up what's on their end. And there is an undercurrent, I believe, of class warfare to some of that anti-Semitism that comes from the left, because it's all become the Jews are privileged because we present as white, so goes the claim. Therefore, we're part of the problem from a progressive lens. I'm grossly oversimplifying, obviously, and there's a lot to attack, maybe something to agree with, but that's what really resonated for me about the Strasbourg event.
Thanks, Elisha. And we're definitely going to go a little bit deeper into some of those divisions within the Jewish community and how we grapple with that a little bit later. But I want to sort of pick up a thread that you started, which is pointing out what are some of the current trends, the major trends that we're seeing in anti-Semitism today. And can you situate for us, maybe we'll start with Rabbi Goldberg and go to Rabbi Farkas, to what extent these trends are part of that age-old story of anti-Semitism, and in what ways are they unique to this current moment?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I think that a lot of these stories that we're hearing, contemporary stories and tropes, are very familiar. There happens to be, it seems to be about four main ones that come again and again. One is this idea of Jewish people as sort of puppet masters, pulling the strings and having access to power and controlling things that are not in our control, but that we're supposedly controlling. Another, and that all has to do with power. Another has to do with wealth, as I think Elisha was sharing about the class element, that Jewish people have access to wealth, or they are buffer between a lower class and an upper class. That's what often a lot of times the results were about. And then there's the stuff around disloyalty, that we are loyal to ourselves and are in the sense of an international Jewish community, but not loyal to a nation that we live in. And then the last one is just pure evil, right? That we are embodiments of evil because we have not accepted primarily, a Christian view of how we should all be believing. And we see those tropes again and again, and they repeat through time. And the major trope that I think is really at play right now is the one about power and puppet master and pulling strings. And that really has reemerged in quite a scary way since around 2016. It's always been there, of course, that's what we're saying, these go and go, but really has reemerged into a political discourse in a big way with like code words, that sort of stand in for like the Jews. Instead, it'll say like George Soros, right, will be the Jews, or like controlling the immigrants coming in from Central America, or the Jews are responsible for all kinds of other woes, right? It's all our fault. And that is a lot of that trope of a puppet master. And that's also how it's really been integrated into anti-Black racism and white supremacy. And if folks haven't had a chance to read the Eric Ward article called Skin in the Game, I would really recommend it, because it really talks about that integration and how those things have worked together to the horrible detriment of Jewish people, but certainly very much to the detriment of Black Americans. So it's stunning how these tropes continue throughout time. And in fact, I think that's a lot of the work of anti-Semitism, is to let people know, as Elisha was saying, no matter their political persuasion, what these tropes are, because sometimes people repeat them and they don't even know what they're doing, right? That's a good view of humanity, right? The one that says that people are ignorant, and if we could just share with them more, they will know. And I believe that is the case for most people. Most people want to be supportive of Jewish people and need to have that opportunity to get educated, no matter what political side they find themselves on. And then I think there's another more nefarious group who is using it strategically to try and create dissent and discord in the United States, and that Jews, as always, are an easy target to do so.
I would add just a couple of small things to what Rabbi Goldberg said. I think she summed it up beautifully. We also live in the information age with the internet. And as one person once said to me, you're never weird when you're on the internet, because you can find a million people who think just like you. And with the ability to reach out across the globe and find people who share similar views, whether they're truthful views, whether they're nefarious views, whether they're hateful views or loving views, you can find a community of people that will reinforce your already preconceived notions of how you approach the world. So when it comes to anti-Semitism, the internet has created an accelerant for folks to come together from all over the globe, from all over the United States, to foster these types of tropes about who we are. And that is probably what's the newest to me in terms of what's happening in the world of anti-Semitism, is that we have these global platforms, privately owned or and publicly operated in many ways, that bring together global conspiracy theories. And when that happens, as Susan said just a few minutes ago, when that happens, it seeds the grounds to those who are powerful that want to use us as a tool for their own political devices. And anytime that we are in that place, whether it was 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago or just yesterday, anytime that that kind of environment is created, the Jews always seem to be caught in the middle. And that is something that I think is both new and old about anti-Semitism today.
Thanks, Rabbi Farkas. Yeah, it sounds like there's sort of this common thread here that you're all picking up on, of the tropes that transcend centuries, but then the specific political context, and in our case, the technological context, really informs how those tropes show up and how we address them as a community. And I want to touch on and sort of expand upon something, Rabbi Goldberg, that you raised, because we've seen a drastic increase in hate and hate crimes across against a range of groups in the last few years. And LA County reported a 23% increase in hate crimes in 2020, which is the highest in over a decade. And that includes a 53% increase in racially motivated hate crimes. And so maybe we'll start with you, Rabbi Goldberg, and then bring it back to Elisha and then Rabbi Farkas. How do you see this increase in anti-Semitism both intertwined with and also distinct from other forms of hatred like Islamophobia, anti-Asian hate, anti-Black racism, et cetera?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think it's really important that we talk about the connections, because I think sometimes in our Jewish world, we feel that we are the only ones who are dealing with these issues. And I think it's really important to remember that we're part of a bigger community. You know, I thank God every day that I'm in Los Angeles. I love this city. I just want to say go Rams. Yesterday was a really big day. And part of the beauty of being in Los Angeles is the multicultural reality that we live in. And it's also the reality of our Jewish community. One of the things that the Jewish community offers the United States is a community that is multiracial, multi-ethnic, is from all parts of the world, is from all kinds of experiences. And I think we really need to bring that forward more as a community, because I think that we get lost by only talking about a white Ashkenazi experience when we are so diverse in so many ways. And our ability to have the dialogue just amongst the Jewish community about what anti-Semitism means for a variety of Jewish experiences. I know that we have some diversity on this panel, but I think we could probably have several more panels that have much more diversity of the Jewish experience, because I think that there's different perspectives around how anti-Semitism is a part of people's lives, and also how it interacts with racism and other forms of bigotry and violence towards queer folks, etc. So I think that part of what we offer is this ability to talk about the larger conversation about what it is when a group of people is attacked through bias and bigotry and prejudice, and what we can then do also to stand together. Everybody knows I'm an eternal optimist, so I'm gonna just put it out here that one of the incredible things that we have in LA also is a really committed interfaith, multicultural interfaith community. And I have to tell you that whenever an anti-Semitic event happens, the first people to text are my brothers and sisters of multiple faiths in this city who are asking if the Jewish community is okay. And I really think that that's part of the way forward, not just for Jewish people, but for all of us, is to continue to learn more about each experience and how we can stand in solidarity with each other in very real ways that help to protect each other. And I just want to say that because I know often when there's an anti-Semitic incident, one of the first things is like, okay, let's just add more security guards at every place we have. And absolutely we need security and safety, but I think it's missing a really big piece. First of all, what does that even mean for the multicultural aspect of our community when we add all that extra security? But also, is that really keeping us safe? And how does being connected to our neighbors and our fellow Angelinos, or whatever city you might be watching this from, where we can go into even deeper partnership to learn how to protect each other.
Thanks, Rabbi Goldberg. You just said a lot about both making sure that we incorporate the array of Jewish experience in our understanding of anti-Semitism, about ensuring that we participate in the larger conversation about hate, and also making sure that our responses to anti-Semitism incorporate the voices and needs of the diverse array of the Jewish community. And I want to make sure that we come back and give attention to those different threads that you raised. But first, I want to pass it to Elisha to say a word if you'd like about anything that Rabbi Goldberg just said, or the question about how do we situate anti-Semitism in the different forms of hatred that we've seen rise recently.
And I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Rabbi Goldberg said. I think that there's a lot of truth there, and it was really good to hear. And finding alliances away from the Jewish community is super important. Look, I think that one of the comments that Rabbi Goldberg made, I'll use as a launching point, maybe for a twist, towards a very controversial topic, which is this concept of it's important that, we not just get more security guards, but that we have to rely on great relationships with everyone. I'll take an additional view. It's not a view that disagrees with that, but I'll say, of course, it's also important that the Jewish people be able to protect ourselves. There are great groups that, go out and organize Jewish security in the synagogues, CSS. It's like, these are terrific agencies that do great work. But, if you look at anti-Semitism as a global phenomenon, as opposed to just a localized phenomenon, I would argue that one of the most important aspects of the Jewish people being able to protect ourselves is the existence of a secure Israel. And that gets very quickly to a controversial topic, because when we get to discussing what is anti-Semitism, often there's this great debate. Is anti-Zionism a form of anti-Semitism? And sometimes people agree, sometimes they don't. I'm personally of the view that to say that, the one state, which has 8,000 square miles, in very hostile territory that was earmarked for our people to return to after thousands of years in the shadow of the Shoah, and to the point on diversity, not just Ashkenazi Jews who fled Europe's shores, but also Middle Eastern Jews who fled the Farhud in Iraq and other oppression in Arab states, and Russian Jews who left the Soviet Union after experiencing secular oppression in the form of the anti-religious, anti-identity flavor of anti-Semitism. I would argue that anti-Zionism is absolutely a form of anti-Semitism, and this is one of the things that somehow or another we got to a point where there have always been minority voices in the Jewish community at the Bund or otherwise who were, against the concept of Israel and felt it wasn't something worth defending. But it feels like it's gotten more heated now, and somehow in the current generation in particular, it's no longer as much of a consensus point as it has been. And I think that that's a great point of weakness and vulnerability in the Jewish community.
I'd like to add a couple of things. Just on security, the policy around security is what I would call the last policy. It's when every other policy around anti-Semitism has failed, because when a person is coming to attack a Jewish institution like they did in Colleyville, that it was only security, the idea of training, whether it was the scan training that Rabbi Citron Walker had, or the security grants that we help provide to institutions, help protect Jewish communities. And that's the last policy. It's not the first policy. The first policy around fighting anti-Semitism is making sure that all of us as a Jewish community understand what is anti-Semitic, understanding where it's coming from, and understanding who are our allies and our neighbors in our various Jewish communities, where we can have these conversations about what it means to be vulnerable. The Federation here in LA convenes quarterly a meeting of vulnerable communities that we share best practices. We share our security apparatus with vulnerable ethnic communities that desire it. We've done training in those communities. And so when it comes to security, we are trying to secure the Jewish community, but by no means the only tool in the toolbox. And then to Elisha, your point about anti-Zionism. To me, when I think about anti-Zionism, there's always been, as you said, members of the Jewish community who have decided that our Jewish fate shouldn't be tied up in a piece of real estate halfway around the world. And those are difficult conversations to have with our brothers and sisters who are Jewish, but I'm willing to have those, because it's about Jews deciding as a community what our Jewish future looks like. For someone who's not Jewish to decide what the Jewish future should look like and use anti-Zionism as a way to try to undo our ability to have self-determination, as you so eloquently put just a few minutes ago, that is, in my opinion, anti-Semitic, because I think only Jews should decide the answer to how we live, when we live And so it's unfortunate that Israel has become such a flashpoint in this conversation, but we cannot separate, in my opinion, anti-Zionism, especially from the non-Jewish community, and anti-Semitism, because we get to decide how we want to live as the vulnerable community, as those who are looking for self-determination, and it shouldn't be others who decide that for us.
Thanks, Rabbi Farkas. I want to pass to Rabbi Goldberg because I see you wanting to respond, but I want to just throw in another question that may already get to what you're wanting to address. You're all raising significant points of difference and tension in our community, which is, as you all sort of named, immensely diverse. We have different experiences of anti-Semitism, both histories and present day, like in the Mizrahi and Sephardic communities, who I believe we're all Ashkenazi here. And so that's one significant point of diversity that we need to account for in these conversations. There's the very real considerations around security and around making sure that Jews of color feel safe, right? And what does safety mean for different members of our community is a significant point of tension. And then Elisha, you raised this question of anti-Zionism and the fact that there's a huge amount of disagreement within the Jewish community. And Rabbi Farkas, you're saying that it's up to us. We need to be able to determine what extent is what is anti-Semitism, right? How do we, when there is such immense disagreement on a lot of these issues, and also diversity and distinctiveness in our communities, how do we unify in the fight against anti-Semitism without flattening that which makes us distinct, and also in the face of such a polarized environment that we're living in? And maybe Rabbi Goldberg, I'll throw it to you, and you can feel free to address that or go along with what you were going to respond earlier.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a couple thoughts. One, I just did want to circle back to the idea of security just for one more moment around, because I feel like Rabbi Farkas, maybe you were conflating more security guards plus trainings. And I think those things are a little bit distinct to me, like this idea that Elisha was saying about how we need to learn how to protect ourselves. I feel like that's really needed. And it's an easier way, like you said, Rabbi Farkas, where it's sort of the last thing. Let's just put security there, rather than what would it look like if we really engaged in trainings to think about how we could take care of ourselves in those situations. Because there's a lot of research and data that shows that like a security guard in the end is not as effective as people in the room knowing what to do. So I'm really hoping that what we could do is do more training that takes into account people's different experiences with security and policing, and really gets to the heart of how we can protect ourselves in those situations. Because I think it's really important for us to feel like we know what to do because of the unfortunate reality of how often they've been happening. And onto the Israel-Palestine piece, I absolutely think that you can have a critique of the state of Israel and that not be anti-Semitic. And I think that it's really important generationally that we're able to talk with great nuance and with room for a variety of different experiences and opinions about policies of the Israeli government, and for that not to automatically be called anti-Semitism. There is definitely criticism of the state of Israel that does feel anti-Semitic, that has these tropes that are, equating all Jews in the same light, that Jewish people should be sent out of the state of Israel, that minimizes the trauma that led to the creation of the state of Israel. There are a lot of things that we could talk about that are anti-Semitic, but to say that any criticism or any talking about Zionism or just talk, I personally am ready to put the Zion, like shift the Zionism turn here and just talking about critique of the government policies of a nation state should absolutely be something we should engage in as Jewish people. And we have a responsibility to. And in fact, it's when I'm in Israel and there's robust discussion and debate about the policies of the government that I feel like, yes, we should be able to do that. And unfortunately, a message that a lot of younger Jews felt they were given is, do not talk at all about this. There's only one way to feel. And then when they learn other things about the reality of the occupation, they begin to feel betrayed and that we weren't allowed to have a full conversation. I really think that our way to keep people connected to the importance of the state of Israel is to really allow for full, robust, honest, complicated, nuanced dialogue about all aspects of Israel. And that will really allow us to stay connected as a Jewish people to doing what you just said, Rabbi Farkas, about being able to determine our own destiny, which is really important. But if we're shutting down our ability to have the conversations, I'm worried about those we will lose by being defensive or saying you could talk about this, but not about that. And Jewish people are smart, and we're used to being in spaces where we ask a lot of questions and we interrogate texts, and that's part of our wisdom tradition. And when young people are in situations where they're told you can talk about this, but the moment you talk about that, you got to be quiet or you got to get out, then I think we're in trouble in a bigger picture way.
I agree with you on that. I think that we should have robust conversation as a Jewish community about how we want to spend our time. What does the nature of our state look like? Who gets to represent us in that state, where exactly that state resides. But that's our conversation to have as a Jewish community, to decide our fate. That's what I think the best version of Zionism is. It's when we are not allowed to even have a discussion about the state, or that we're actually not allowed to have a state, or that state is then reconstituted under a false guise of being colonialists or being an apartheid state. That is where the delegitimization of the existence of the state of Israel slides from being a legitimate critique of our homeland to being anti-Semitic, in my opinion. And just by the way, as for security, I just had a whole briefing about this. So the Federation's security apparatus, ours here in LA, called the Community Security Initiative, provides personal resiliency training to anyone who wants it in the Jewish community as part of these institutions. We provide de-escalation training as part of that. We provide training to the guards, if you decide to employ a guard, for Jewish cultural sensitivity training. So part of the security apparatus, and I don't mean to linger on this, is a very robust training apparatus, or training phenomenon that, I'll invite, if Nefesh wants to participate in it, we'll be out there tomorrow trying to set up a time to help train your folks in it. It's really important. It's really part of the Jewish conversation. And then look, go ahead. Well, I wanted to shift the conversation back to actual anti-Semitism, and that, to my mind, it doesn't matter if it comes from the left or the right, or comes from rich people or poor people, or if it comes from people who speak English or doesn't speak English, or whatever race or ethnicity from which it originates. All of those arrows, all of those spears still point in the same direction, and they point towards us. And that is the most important part of this conversation, is that it doesn't matter if it's left or right. Jews are the victims of anti-Semitism. And that is a unifying aspect. Maybe not in the most positive way, but that is a unifying aspect of who we are, is that we share in that vulnerability, no matter who is pointing the spear at us.
Farkas,
I just have one question for you. I know to jump in really quickly. Can we get that personal resilience training just for the difficult conversations we Jews are having with each other? Because that could be pretty useful.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
But I want to really elevate that, Elisha, because that is it. I mean, we have come to a point in the Jewish community where we are really not talking to each other, and not talking well across different segments of our community. And I think that idea of, when dialogue and questioning breaks down inside of the Jewish community, we are in trouble, because that is at the core of who we are, right? Our willingness to really engage from a variety of views and to see things from other people's perspective. And we've really, I know that this is true in the broader community, and people talk about the breakdown of our ability to dialogue with each other. But I'm concerned about my community, about the Jewish community, and how we have, there's trigger words, and then the conversation stops. And what would it be like if we could model conversations where we're really willing to say the differences? And I have absolutely been in Jewish spaces where it was said directly, Don't say this, 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 and that. Okay, just don't say those things. That way we don't have to have any problems. It's like, really? That's the idea. We're going to just avoid this altogether. And these are issues, when we drop down from the level of politics, we get down into our deepest values. And at the level of our values, we really have to be able to share with each other what's happening.
I just want to say amen to that. I mean, we've only just met tonight, but as Rav Noah knows, I spent a month of my life last summer just trying to see what it would take to pull together some number of Jews on Capitol Hill in the wake of the bombs that were dropping on Israel during the most recent Gaza confrontation. I was curious, can I find words and a platform that Jews on both the left and right of the political spectrum, the different denominations, could agree on? And the wording that we came up with was that Jews, both here in the United States and in the rest of the world, including Israel, have the right to exist in peace and security. Even that sentence was controversial. JVP didn't want to be part of it because really, like, what are you doing there with Israel? Really, like, so JVP got angry. J Street didn't want to come in. ZOA was yelling at me because we'd even invited J Street and JVP. There was all this like fighting on the edges, even over what I thought was going to be a pretty straightforward statement. And I'll tell you, one of the most moving moments for me when we ultimately were able to put together a rally and get people together is we had on stage a young man who had been attacked in the Illinois area. He'd been attacked in his car by a group of violent people because he had an Israeli flag. And he got up and spoke and quoted Menachem Begin, okay? So just imagine how that goes down on the left side of an audience that appears. And then he was followed by Rabbi David Saperstein of the Reform Movement, who got up and spoke about the occupation and used that word. And you can imagine how that went down on the right side of the audience. And nonetheless, despite the fact that there were these deeply uncomfortable moments where people didn't want to hear what was being said, I felt this is the only way we can go, is to be able to have both those phrases in a conversation because they represent real points of view within our community.
Thanks, Alisa. Sorry,
Absolutely.
Rabbi Goldberg. Yeah, why don't you make,
Absolutely
yes, go
agree
ahead.
with that. And I want to say that, just to be honest, there is a certain dialogue that gets to be held. And for the most part, the one that's sort of the dominant dialogue doesn't always reflect the great diversity of the Jewish people. So in it, I think sometimes when we do that unnuanced thing where we go, oh, the left or the right, and this, young people, old people, I think it also loses some of the nuance that says there are conversations happening in the organized Jewish community. But for the most part, the majority of American Jews are left out of that, right? So people who are synagogue going Jews, I'm a rabbi, obviously I'm supportive temples and synagogues, that's where I have deep belief in it. But we also have to remember that the majority of Jewish people don't go into these spaces, right? Or to federations, right? So most people have opted out. So we have to really think about why. And if we say we want to have the same conversations and just get a slightly different perspective, I don't think that's really a commitment to hearing what all of the Jewish people have to say, because the Jewish people have often opted out, especially generationally, in some of these issues that we're talking about, just feel like people don't want to hear them. And that when they do, they're just sort of shunned. And so I think, and that also has to do with resources, who's funding things. Like I've also been told, don't say certain things in front of certain funders because you'll never get money, right? And that means that only certain projects are getting funded. So I think that this need to have robust, deep, complex, nuanced conversations in the Jewish community also needs to be really honest about how we could do that in a way that really reflects the true diversity of the Jewish community.
Thanks,
I couldn't agree more.
Rabbi Farkas, I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to move us. I want to just first reflect on, Rabbi Goldberg, you said, what would it look like to model the conversation across difference? And I think that this conversation could actually do that, and it could go on for a lot longer. And I think that it's a beautiful thing, and something that the Federation does support through its partnership with organizations like Resetting the Table, which I would love to shout out as holding those difficult conversations across divides. But I think that we've just begun to parse out some of the difficult nuances within our community, and we haven't even started to address how do we then talk about anti-Semitism externally? How do we, given how hard it is to talk about these differences internally, and they're so layered and nuanced, like all three of you have pointed out, how do we start to move forward? So I want to throw in a question to move us in that direction and pass it to Rabbi Farkas. Related to just a piece of news recently. We've all heard about Whoopi Goldberg and her recent comments that on The View that the Holocaust was not about race. And there's a division, like with so many other things, about how that was handled. She apologized and reflected on her words, but then ABC suspended her for 2 weeks after that happened. And many Jewish leaders have argued that there should be space for tshuva or repentance and then redemption, even and especially around topics like anti-Semitism. So Rabbi Farkas, I'll pass it to you. How should we respond when people outside of the Jewish community, like Whoopi Goldberg, make anti-Semitic comments? And in doing so, how do we toe this line between calling out and calling in, calling out when, anti-Semitism and calling in to a learning exchange? And then maybe if you have examples of successes, that successful learning moments or difficult conversations like that, that would be great.
Yeah, I really think that's a great example, Maia. The situation with Whoopi Goldberg is just an example, I think, of just the number of people who don't understand us, don't understand our history, don't understand what actually happened in the Holocaust. We got to remember how few we are in the world and how much fewer we are because of the Holocaust. I've used this statistic before, but there are more people who live between San Diego and Santa Barbara than there are Jews in the entire world. I just let that sink in. There are more people who watched the Super Bowl last night than there were entire Jews in the world. We're very, very, very small people, which means that most human beings don't experience being friends or colleagues with a Jewish person. And that means that our experience, our story, the story of who we were, the ancient story, the story of the European Holocaust, the story of Aliyah and the establishment of the State of Israel, is our story, but it's a story that many people don't really know or understand. So if Whoopi Goldberg makes a statement and makes a statement out of ignorance about the Holocaust, and maybe that statement was anti-Semitic, I don't know that she is an anti-Semite because she made an anti-Semitic statement. And then she went through the rest of the day trying to learn. She gave a platform to the colleague Jonathan Greenblatt from the ADL to speak about anti-Semitism and give her an opportunity to learn and to adjust her thoughts and feelings. I want, as an educator, as a rabbi, those experiences over and over and over and over again. I also want to say this is an opportunity then to discuss that there should be compulsory Holocaust education for everyone, just as there should be compulsory education about the darker sides of American history, because that is how we learn, that is how we grow, and that is how we heal. And no matter whether you're from the left or the right, internally in the Jewish community, if we allow ourselves for that room for healing, that room for strength, that room for growing, and what we really realize is that what we share as this tiny fraction of a people is that we have something between us that binds us together, this covenant that goes back thousands of years and hopefully is a covenant that draws us into the future together, then we can rely on that and not allow these divides to eat away at our souls and tear ourselves apart. Because there are forces in the world who are trying to tear the Jewish community apart because they profit from it monetarily, they profit from it politically, and they profit from it for fame and for fortune. And so I would just encourage us to remember that we are still Am Echad, we are still one nation that tries to come together no matter how much we feel we're divided.
Thanks, Rabbi Farkas. And maybe I'll pass it to Elisha and add in sort of a zoomed out question saying, what are, like Rabbi Farkas started to name them, some proactive steps that we can take in the fight against anti-Semitism? I'm thinking specifically about education, coalition building, skill building, all of those kinds of strategies. that Rabbi Farkas started to name.
Look, I think we've talked a lot about the community engagement and some other items. So I'm just going to go with number 1, 2, and 3 are all be more Jewish. You want to fight anti-Semitism? Be more Jewish, because that's what they want to stop. The anti-Semites win if we stop being more Jewish. They win if we stop existing because they killed us and the Jewish race is no more. And they win if we stop identifying and perpetuating this culture and this faith and tradition that we're part of. That's how they win. So my view is be more Jewish, and that can be wherever you are. I mean, look, I'm going to quote now the Lubavitcher Rebbe in some sense, because Chabad always believed that the idea was to make people do one more mitzvah. It'll give people the opportunity to do one more mitzvah wherever you were in your personal observance. And I think that that actually, is the right direction. I think that the idea of becoming more identified with Judaism, if you don't currently light candles at your Shabbat dinner table, try it. If you haven't been to shul in a long time and you want to see what's going on, find one that works for you and take your family. If you're already saying Shalom Aleichem and you're singing that at the Shabbos dinner table, then add Eshes Chayil or any other nigun, or maybe try benching the whole benching, or if you don't, or even the first part of the benching, or open up a page of Gemara and hop on the Daf Yomi train for a couple of days when your friends who are doing it say, yeah, actually, this is a good part. We're doing lots of Agadata now. We're doing lots of stories, jump in right here. There are so many great ways to be involved. And of course, there's communal work to get involved with, delivering Mishloach Manot in the double month of Adar that we're having now, sending gifts to your friends and gifts to the needy. There's a gazillion ways to become more Jewish and to identify. And to me, that's answers 1, 2, and 3.
Thanks, Elisha. You addressed a question that I was going to ask and then skipped about how so much of Jewish communal expression is centered, these days is centered on fighting anti-Semitism. I know for me, one of my most formative Jewish experiences was in high school, visiting the concentration camps and understanding the destructive power of anti-Semitism. And I wanted to know, how can we, move from a sort of a negative into a positive in terms of our Jewish identity building and sense of self. And I think you touched on that really beautifully.
I come from a survivor family, obviously. Absolutely. So, you might think that I spend a lot of time with my kids talking about the Shoah or night. I tell you, I spend relatively little, not that I don't underplay it. I took my son to Auschwitz and Siget after his bar mitzvah, and I'll do the same for my daughter. But for me, the whole key is joy. I want them to have a Shabbos dinner table with dynamic conversation, interesting guests, the candles, the benching, the songs, that should become, they're going to feel that when 20 years from now, they have a decision to make on whether or not to intermarry with a partner that doesn't want to keep the Jewish faith, or whether they're going to decide to walk away from their people, or whether they're going to turn their back on the concept that we should have a state of Israel. They're going to have all these decisions to make. And I think that what's going to keep them on the derech, if you will, the path, isn't any rational argument that I put in their head. It's going to be in their heart. Do they feel joy at being connected to our people?
Thanks, Elisha. I want to add, Rabbi Farkas.
Okay. First of all, Elisha, I love when you say that, because of the memory you carry with you and the name that you carry. I think about like Jewish identity in the past and in the present. So in the Haggadah, there are 2 forever statements. There are only really 2. The first one says, in every generation, there are those who rose up against us to try to destroy us. And then a couple paragraphs later, it says, in every generation, one should see themselves as if they went out from the land of Egypt. And those are really the 2 paradigms from which we can view ourselves. Either we view ourselves through the lens of our enemy, through the lens of those who hate us, and we use anti-Semitism to define our Jewish existence, the fight within us, the fight or flight response is the energy that we get from that vitriol, that rage, that anger. That's one way to define ourselves. And in some ways, generations of Jews have defined themselves through the anti-Semitism that has come to define them. And then the other way of defining Judaism and Jewish identity is through our own internal story, where we don't even think about the anti-Semites because we have such a rich tradition, and we have such a rich Torah, we have such a rich spiritual life, and that we actually fight anti-Semitism by creating joy, meaning, and love in covenant through our own internal story. And both of those stories are in the Exodus from Egypt, but only one of them has a toast. Only one of them you raise a glass, and that's the internal story, because that's what really matters most. So when I think about Jewish identity today, it's about building a joyous Jewish life, dealing with anti-Semitism, but not letting anti-Semitism define who we are.
Thanks, Rabbi Farkas. I want to bring it to Rabbi Goldberg and address some of the themes that are popping up in our audience questions. I think Elisha and Rabbi Farkas, you both just touched on one of those themes, which is how do we talk to the next generation? How do we fold in our kids, right? In this conversation. I think you both touched on that really beautifully. Rabbi Goldberg, you've been a coalition builder for a long time. I know we're both involved with New Ground, a Muslim Jewish Partnership for Change, which is a great organization here in LA that does that kind of coalition building. Can you say a word about allyship and how do we build allyship as Jews with others? And what is it for those who are not Jewish who are watching, what does allyship to the Jewish community look like? And can you say a word about how does that look as a means to address anti-Semitism?
I love your 7-point questions, Maia.
Trying to touch on many things in a complicated conversation.
I'm going to try for a piece of what you just
as much as you'd like.
I want to start with the young people question that's coming up from the people asking questions of this panel. And I want to just say, so beautiful, Rabbi Farkas, what you just shared from the Haggadah. And one of the pieces that I think is really true in every generation, it's about how we've survived. And that is that the Jewish people have survived by at once being committed, deeply committed to our tradition. So many of the things that Elisha just shared, right? Committing to Shabbos, committing to all of the parts of our tradition, to our wisdom tradition, our ritual, our ethical life. And at the same time, being willing to transform and make it new in every generation. That is the great enduring gift that the rabbis of late antiquity gave us. They radically transformed after the destruction of the temple what it was to be a Jew, actually maybe even creating Judaism from Israelite practice. And in every generation, our willingness to do both, to hold on to the tradition and to radically transform it. And if we don't do both, we will not continue as a people. And that's another divide you'll often see. Groups that only want to keep it exactly the same, which makes me very fearful because then I'm not sure we will continue. And then people who only want to transform to the point of walking away, which is not okay. We want to radically transform in every generation what Judaism means, how it lives and breathes in our bodies right now. And so when young people in our communities and our lives are asking questions and we shun them, or we say that's not right, or that's not Jewish, or that's not the way we do it, then that's problematic. We need to tell them and bring people into the richness of the tradition and also be willing to honestly hear what they have to give us. What a gift each generation gives us in telling us more deeply about who they are. And there are so many changes happening in the Jewish world because of that. Because of the willingness to show up, of our multiple selves, right? Our multiple identities, not willing to check anything at the door. We all have to stretch now. We all have to stretch. And it's in that stretching that the Jewish people continue. And in terms of being connected to others, that's also how we've done it. We've always been a minority group throughout the centuries that have been able to connect with those around us and stay true to who we are. And we just keep doing that. It's part of all of the I'm always so moved, like what Rabbi Farkas was just talking about, the partnership they have in multi-faith, talking about how to protect everyone. I mean, that is really what the Jewish people have done. Take care of ourselves and transform, take care of our people and be a part of a whole larger multicultural interfaith community. And in doing that, there are going to be times that are painful. Like a lot of people think that interfaith work should just all be happy, 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 but it isn't. And it's actually when it deepens, when we come across difference. So if we're in a situation where we hear something that's anti-Semitic, I really want to encourage you to share that with who's with you and say, let me tell you a bit about how that sounds to me. And if that person then turns to you and says, can I share with you something about that felt racist in what you shared or Islamophobic, that we are also willing to say, tell me more about that so I can learn. But a lot of that are the skills of being able to have deeper conversations where we listen and we share. And those, unfortunately, are not part of our curriculums in our schools, and I think it should be. And right now, it's not widespread in our Jewish curriculums, how to have deep, meaningful conversations across difference. And being able to do that is really, really, really pivotal to countering a lot of the negativity and the horrible politicalization of difference that's really trying to divide people. So I think that this ability for us to take care of each other, to have a robust internal conversation around who we are, and to really be willing to share with others, even when it gets difficult. And the difficulty could often be with ourselves and in our community, that we make a commitment to doing the emotional, intelligent work of having these conversations. And that's a skill set. That's not like, oh, I'm just going to pick up this and start. That's a skill set to develop emotionally intelligent conversation resources. So I hope that that's something that potentially could come out of this conversation today, is a commitment to doing more of that in more of our Jewish spaces.
Right, Goldberg. I want to ask one more question as we moved into our final 2 minutes, and pass it to Elisha and then maybe Rabbi Farkas to close us out. And it's a dreaming question, which is, what would a world without anti-Semitism look like? And I ask this not as a, cheesy question, but rather as a question of hopefulness, and as of hopefulness. I'll leave it there. Elisha.
Listen, the ancient texts, describe what a world without anti-Semitism looks like, and they actually say, some of them, that's the coming of the Mashiach. That when Mashiach arrives, that is the day when the other nations are not going to sit there and try to annihilate the Jewish people anymore. A world where, whether you believe that the Iran deal happened and somehow they now love us, or that it didn't happen but they no longer wanted to kill us, that we're in a world where they're no longer trying to kill us. That's Mashiach. That's how it's defined in ancient texts, believe it or not.
Thank you, Elisha. Rabbi Farkas.
I think that a world without anti-Semitism can't be a world that is only without anti-Semitism. I think it has to be a world of abundant love and not a world of abundant hate. A world that doesn't see itself wrapped up in the scarcity of human life and really is more gracious and overflowing. So to me, a world without anti-Semitism is also a world without racism, a world without hate, a world without violence. And I think that's a world that we're all dreaming of. And that's a world we should all be working for. And I think that unfortunately, since hate has begun and since the Jewish people have been around, there has been anti-Semitism. And the only way that we're going to change that is if we all actively work together.
Thanks, Rabbi Farkas. I know no better way than of closing out this panel. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, Elisha, Rabbi Farkas, for your time. Thank you to our audience members. I'm sorry we didn't get to read your questions verbatim, but I hope that we were able to touch on the themes and intentions behind them. I think if we know anything, it's that there's always more conversation to be had, and to get to that sort of dream that you're describing. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, a beautiful Valentine's Day for those who are celebrating, and a beautiful rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you.